Mr. David's eyes glistened with unshed tears. Before you get married, I want you to give me a son each. Find a man, any man, and bear me grandsons. In return, I will give you anything you desire. Anything that money could buy. The David family was one of the most respected in the village of Igboukwu. Their wealth was unmatched, their reputation spotless. Mr. David, a shrewd businessman, owned several plots of land, numerous houses, and thriving businesses. His wife, a kind-hearted woman, was known for her generosity, often helping the less privileged in the community. Together, they had built a home filled with love, discipline, and unity. Their two daughters, Clara and Anita, were the pride of the family. Beautiful, well-mannered, and intelligent, they were admired by many in the village. Parents often used them as examples of how young girls should behave, dignified, respectful, and obedient. Despite their father's wealth, the girls were not spoiled. They had been raised with strong moral values, knowing that hard work and integrity mattered more than riches. In their home, love flowed effortlessly. The family often shared meals together, laughing over small jokes and discussing their daily experiences. Mr. David took pride in his daughters, praising their achievements and encouraging them to aim for greater heights. His wife, a nurturing woman, ensured that peace and warmth filled their household. The people of Igboukwu held the David family in high regard. Mr. David was a respected figure, often invited to settle disputes in the village. His words carried weight, and his influence stretched far beyond the borders of the community. His wealth had not made him arrogant, rather, he used it to uplift others. Whenever there was a village meeting or a traditional festival, he contributed generously, earning him the admiration of the elders and the younger generation alike. However, beneath this perfect life, a silent pain gnawed at Mr. David's heart. His joy was incomplete, his wealth meaningless without a son to carry his name into the next generation. Tragedy had struck a few months after the birth of his second daughter. A motor accident left him with an injury in his groin, making him incapable of impregnating a woman again. The village's tradition was clear: a man without a male heir was considered incomplete, a living ghost whose name would vanish after his death. Despite his success, the whispers in the village never ceased. People often murmured behind his back, "What is the use of all that wealth if he has no son?" Though his family lived in peace and love, a dark cloud loomed over them, a sorrow only he and his wife truly understood. And soon, that sorrow would push him to make a desperate decision that would change their lives forever. Mr. David sat in the living room, his heart heavy with the weight of the words he was about to speak. His wife, seated beside him, looked just as troubled. Tonight was not an ordinary night. It was a night that would change their family forever. Clara and Anita sat across from them, their faces filled with curiosity. They had never seen their parents so tense before. "My daughters," Mr. David began, his voice strained. "You both know that I love you more than anything in this world. You are my pride, my joy. But I am not at peace." He paused, inhaling deeply before continuing. "I have no son to carry on my name." The girls glanced at each other, confused. "But Papa, does that really matter?" Clara asked. "It matters more than you can imagine," he said, his voice trembling. "Our people believe that a man without a son is like a tree without roots. When I die, my name will be forgotten. My wealth will be scattered. I cannot let that happen." The silence was deafening. "What do you want us to do?" Anita asked cautiously. Their mother lowered her head, unable to look at them. Mr. David's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "Before you get married, I want you to give me a son each. Find a man, any man, and bear me grandsons. In return, I will give you anything you desire. Anything that money could buy. A sharp gasp filled the room. Papa, you can't be serious. Clara's voice broke with shock. Tears streamed down Anita's cheeks. You raised us to be decent, to have dignity. And now you want us to throw it all away? Mr. David clenched his fists. I would never ask this of you if I had another choice. I am begging you. The girls sobbed, torn between their love for their father and the shame of his request. The man they respected most had just shattered their world. The moment Clara and Anita agreed to their father's request, their world changed. What once seemed unthinkable had now become their burden to bear. The weight of his desperation pressed down on them, suffocating their sense of dignity and self-worth. At first, they tried to go about it carefully. They approached men they considered decent, men who were educated, well-mannered, and responsible. But none of them got pregnant. One evening, Clara sat across from Frank, a young businessman she had known since childhood. He had always admired her, and she hoped he would understand if she opened up to him. But when she nervously told him about her father's wish, his expression turned cold. Are you out of your mind? He asked, pushing back his chair. You want me to get you pregnant and walk away? What kind of woman does that? Clara's cheeks burned with humiliation. I am just doing it, my father, she stammered. Frank shook his head, disgusted. Your father should be ashamed of himself for asking you to do this. And you, Clara, you are better than this. Tears welled in her eyes as she watched him walk away. Anita had no better luck. She confided in Jerry, a university friend she had once admired, but he only laughed bitterly. So this is what it has come to. You, the same Anita who used to lecture other girls about self-respect. He shook his head. I can't believe this. If you want a child so badly, marry someone. Don't reduce yourself to this. Anita felt sick. Each rejection made her feel like she was losing pieces of herself. She could still hear the echoes of their father's plead, but how could she bring herself to do this? Days passed, then weeks. The pressure mounted. Their father would sit with them each evening, his eyes sunken with worry. Keep trying, he urged. Don't give up on me. Their mother watched in silence, sorrowful but powerless. With no other options, the girls lowered their expectations. If decent men wouldn't help them, perhaps others would. Clara started entertaining the advances of Charles, a notorious flirt in the village. He had never been serious about any woman, and when Clara offered her body to him, he jumped at the opportunity of sleeping with her, even though Clara didn't confine her mission to him. He only thought he had yet conquered another woman. Afterward, Clara felt numb. She barely remembered what happened, only that she went home and scrubbed herself in the bath until her skin burned. Yet, she didn't get pregnant. Anita fared no better. She tried with a man she met at the market, a trader known for being reckless. When Anita made advances on him, he took the opportunity without hesitation. After sleeping with him, Anita lay awake all night, staring at the ceiling, wondering if she had just thrown her dignity away for nothing. Despite their efforts, neither of them conceived. And with each failure, their father's desperation grew. And so did their shame. The nights became longer, the days heavier. Clara and Anita could no longer recognize the girls they once were. Each time they lay with a man, they told themselves it was for their father, that it was just one more time, that soon, they would conceive, and it would all be over. But months passed, and their wombs remained empty. Their father's once hopeful face had hardened into deep lines of worry. He paced the house, restless, consumed by the thought that his name would vanish with him. Every time he looked at his daughters, his eyes carried both love and disappointment, a silent reminder that they had failed him. Clara and Anita could barely meet his gaze anymore. The shame was unbearable. One night, Mr. David called them into the living room. His hands trembled as he spoke. "Tomorrow we will go to a hospital to find out why none of you can conceive." The results from the hospital came out and it shows that nothing is wrong with them. They are perfectly healthy enough to conceive. Back home their father asked, "Why haven't any of you conceived?" His voice cracked with frustration. "Are you even trying at all?" The words cut through their hearts like a blade. "Papa, how can you ask us that?" Anita whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "Do you think this is easy for us?" Clara clenched her fist. "We have done everything you asked. We have given ourselves to men who don't love us, who don't care about us. And still, nothing." Her voice broke. "Do you know what that feels like?" Their mother sobbed silently in the corner, powerless. Mr. David exhaled shakily. "Then try harder," he murmured. The air in the room was suffocating. That night, as the sisters lay awake in their separate rooms, they both felt the same crushing realization: they had lost themselves, and it was far too late to turn back. Clara sat on the edge of her bed, staring at her reflection in the mirror. She barely recognized herself. The girl who once held her dignity so close was now a stranger. The sadness in her eyes had been replaced by something else: emptiness. It had started with their father's desperation, but somewhere along the way, things had changed. At first, she and Anita had seen each encounter with a man as a painful duty, something to be endured for the sake of their father's wishes. But over time, something inside them had shifted. What began as an unbearable burden became familiar. The shame they once felt started to fade. It no longer hurt as much. Soon, they no longer waited for the right men to come along, they sought them out. Not for their father anymore, but for themselves. Anita, who had once been disgusted by the thought of some women sleeping around with different men, now felt a strange thrill about it. Men no longer repulsed her. Some nights, she even found herself missing the touch of a man. And then came the alcohol. One evening, after yet another failed attempt to conceive, Clara and Anita found themselves in a bar on the outskirts of the village. It was a place they would have never dared to enter before. The air was thick with cigarette smoke, and the laughter of men filled the room. "Just one drink," Anita had said, staring at the golden liquid in her cup. "Just to forget for a little while." But one drink became two. Then three. That night, they stumbled home in the darkness, laughing, the weight of their shame numbed by the alcohol. Mr. David sat in his once proud home, staring blankly at the floor. The walls that had once echoed with laughter and warmth now carried only shame. He could hear the muffled voices, the drunken giggles of his daughters from their rooms, the heavy footsteps of strange men coming and going. His hands trembled as he gripped the armrest of his chair. How had it come to this? It started subtly. First, Clara and Anita would return home late, their clothes smelling of alcohol and cigarette smoke. Then, they stopped caring altogether. Men no longer had to be sought out in dark corners, they were brought openly into the house. The girls no longer felt shame in their actions. They had abandoned all restraint. One night, Mr. David watched in horror as Anita walked past him, her arms wrapped around a man old enough to be his age. She didn't even glance at him as she led the stranger into her bedroom. The door shut, and moments later, the sounds began. His chest tightened. He wanted to scream, to pull the man out of the room and beat him senseless. But he couldn't. He had lost control long ago. His wife sat beside him, her face buried in her hands, weeping softly. "David, this is your fault," she whispered. "You destroyed them." Her words cut deeper than any blade. He had thought he was fighting for his legacy, for his bloodline. Instead, he had condemned his own daughters to ruin. In his desperation, he had turned his home into a brothel. His daughters, once the pride of the village, were now whispered about in disgust. And the worst part? There was nothing he could do to stop it. The whispers had grown louder. The once respected David family had become the shame of the village. No one spoke of Clara and Anita with admiration anymore. Their names were now uttered with mockery, disgust, and pity. Neighbors who once visited their home with gifts and warm greetings now crossed the street to avoid them. Women pulled their children closer when the sisters walked by, as if their disgrace were contagious. The same men who had once lusted after them in secret now laughed openly at their downfall. One afternoon, as Anita walked through the village market, she heard the whispers that followed her like a shadow. Such a waste. They were so beautiful. A curse must be on that family. Who will ever marry them now? Anita clenched her fists, her heart pounding with rage and humiliation. She wanted to scream, to make them all shut up. But what could she say? Wasn't it all true? Back home, Mr. David had become a ghost of himself. His shoulders were hunched, his hair graying faster than time allowed. He barely spoke. He barely ate. He simply sat in silence, drowning in his own torment. One evening, he stood before his daughters, his eyes hollow. "Tell me, when will you stop?" His voice was weak, almost pleading. Clara scoffed. "Stop. Stop what, Papa? Isn't this what you wanted? Isn't this what you asked for?" Her voice dripped with bitterness. Anita looked away, blinking back tears. "You destroyed us," she whispered. Mr. David's lips trembled, his hands shaking at his sides. He wanted to deny it, to tell them he had only meant to secure their future. But as he looked at them, truly looked at them, he saw it. The brokenness. The pain. The emptiness. That night, as the village slept, Mr. David took a rope and walked to the mango tree behind his house. The same tree where he once sat with his daughters, telling them stories, dreaming of their future. By morning, his lifeless body hung from its branches. The news spread like wildfire. The villagers gathered, whispering among themselves. Some shook their heads in pity. Others scoffed. "He brought this upon himself," one man muttered. "What a disgraceful way to die," another spat. His wife collapsed in grief, wailing uncontrollably. But Clara and Anita only stood in silence, staring at their father's body. For the first time, they felt something worse than shame. They felt guilt. Mr. David's death shook the entire village, but no one mourned him the way his wife did. She wailed for days, refusing to eat, refusing to sleep. Her once strong husband, the man she had built a life with, was gone, driven to his death by the weight of his own regrets. Clara and Anita stood by, numb. They had no tears left to cry. Their father's lifeless body hanging from the mango tree haunted their thoughts. The guilt pressed against their chests, suffocating them. They had despised him for what he made them do, but now that he was gone, all they felt was emptiness. The villagers muttered among themselves. Some pitied them, others sneered. "They have ruined their father. They should be ashamed." Their home, once a place of laughter, was now a house of sorrow. And for the first time, Clara and Anita felt truly alone. The days following Mr. David's death were heavy with sorrow, but fate had yet another blow to deliver. Clara, the eldest daughter, fell gravely ill. It started as weakness, a constant fatigue that wouldn't go away. Then came the vomiting, the unbearable body pain, and the swelling in her legs. At first, she dismissed it, thinking it was just the effects of her reckless lifestyle catching up to her. But when she collapsed one evening, her mother and sister rushed her to the hospital in panic. The doctor's words felt like a hammer to their chests. "Her kidneys have failed," he said gravely. "Years of excessive drinking and smoking have taken a toll on her body. She needs urgent treatment, but her chances are slim." Her mother collapsed to the floor, wailing, "No, doctor. Please save my daughter." Anita clutched Clara's weak hands, tears streaming down her face. "Clara, you'll be fine," she whispered, her voice breaking. But even as she said it, deep down, she knew the truth. Clara was fading. For weeks, Clara remained in the hospital bed, her body growing weaker by the day. She barely spoke. Her once radiant beauty had withered, her face now pale and hollow. At night, she would whisper in regret, "I never wanted this, Anita. We had a good life. How did we let it come to this?" Anita could not answer. She sat beside her sister, but her heart felt like it was being torn apart. One cold morning, as the harmattan wind blew outside, Clara took her last breath. Her mother's scream pierced the silence of the hospital ward. "Clara, wake up. Don't leave me. I have no one else." She shook her lifeless daughter, but Clara was gone. The news spread through the village, and people murmured in pity. First the father, now the daughter. This family is cursed. Anita stood by Clara's grave, staring at the fresh mound of earth. She should have been shattered. She should have changed. But she didn't. She simply wiped her tears and walked away. Anita no longer cared. Not about her mother. Not about herself. Not about the world. Clara's death should have shaken her, should have been the wake-up call she needed, but instead, it pushed her further into destruction. She drank more, smoked more, and gave herself to any man who would have her. The pain was too much, and this was the only way she knew to escape it. Mrs. David watched helplessly as the last of her family slipped away. She had lost her husband, then her eldest daughter, and now, in the cruelest way, she was losing Anita too, though Anita was still alive. She cried herself to sleep every night, praying for a miracle, but none came. The village, once filled with mocking whispers, now spoke only in hushed tones of pity. The great David family, once honored and respected, was no more. Mr. David's worst fear had become reality. His name had not been carried on. His wealth, his legacy, all of it, gone, buried in the graves of regret and sorrow. And as Anita walked through the streets, lost in her reckless haze, the last trace of the David family disappeared into nothingness. Thanks for watching this wonderful story. Hope you enjoyed it. See you on the next one. Please like and subscribe.